Prof-It is brought to you by StopToShop.com, and they've got a handful of specials for the upcoming season of Pokemon. They've got Pokemon pack codes for the soon-to-be live Pokemon Trading Card Game Online program, and the prices for all Heart Gold, Soul Silveron single cards have been cut. In addition, click on the link in my description and get a 10% discount on your full order at checkout. If you're looking for cards, make the stop. It's Stop to Shop. It's been a long time, over a month I think, but I'm finally back and I'm ready to get some more content out. Now, as you can see, things have changed a little bit. I am back in my college apartment, which means I don't have that neat little table anymore to hold my notebook on, so I can just briefly glance down and see it. Now I might have to actually hold it up to my face or here. Maybe it makes you look like a news reporter, but I think it might look kind of dumb. But I've dealt with many bigger format changes before in the past, and I'm willing to do whatever I can to make this format as natural as possible. I'm hoping for episodes every single day again. So far I've lived up to that, but we'll see how things go while college is going. But you guys don't want to hear me ramble. You want to hear about Worlds, you want to hear about the new set, you want to hear about next year. So let's get right to it.
You're ready to rock it with my nonsense and my hopes Poke projects. You won't stop till you're bob to the top with all the hobbits. Hip with the metagame train, the reigning top kid's at the top of his game, and you can't hit my top fist.
You want the best tricks? I suggest you Prof-It. You want a mess sprint? I suggest you drop it.
Once we started rolling, you know you can't stop it. Let's go and get some lessons from JWittz and Prof-It. Yeah.
So our first topic of schedule is Worlds. Now, by now, everybody and their grandma knows that I did pretty well at Worlds for my first time. I had a great time, I had a great tournament experience. I already did a tournament report, and even though it was just verbally with no pictures or anything fancy like that, I'm pretty much done talking about myself. I don't like to think that I have that big of an ego. We've all heard the story, we all know how I did and how my matches went, but I just like to talk about the decks that were played and the tournament itself. So let's get right to that. Now, as things have gone in the past, I'm just going to discuss the Masters results. Now, I know a lot of you senior and junior players might be upset about this, but I just do it for time constraints, and generally the stuff that happens in the Masters can still be applied back to seniors and juniors, especially this year when all the top decks for seniors and juniors were the same as those seen in Masters. So without further ado, right here is your top 16 decks for the top cut at this year's World Championships for Masters. Now, looking at this right away, you're going to notice that there is not very much variety. In fact, if you exclude the 2 single copy decks that were in the top cut, there were only 3 different decks that made it. Now, a lot of this is because we have a very small pool of cards right now. We got rotated to Heart Gold, Soul Silveron, leaving us with just, 5-6 sets. One of them is a reprint set, so we really don't have much to work with. But, it's interesting to note that the format still has a lot of room for expansion, and as new sets come out, I'm sure that it'll become more diverse. But let's take a look at all those top decks. Reshifflosion came in first with 8 copies played. Magnezone with Yanmega came in second with 4 copies, and that includes myself. Magnusson Emboar found itself into 2 places in the top cut. And the last 2 were one Stage 1's combination with like Donphan and Yanmega, and one I don't know what to call it yet. Everyone just calls it Ross's deck. I've talked about it a lot, and for a long time now, all you're going to have to say is Ross's deck, and everybody's going to know what it is. So I'll go through these one by one. I'm going to leave out the Stage 1s because I've talked about it before, and it only saw 1 spot within the top 16 decks, but here are the top 4 decks that performed at Worlds, and why they did well. First, let's talk about Reshifflosion, since that was the biggest choice. What made it good? Now, I think a lot of players were really invested in all the hype that came after Nationals. Reshifflosion did fairly well. There was a player who took it to 9-0 through Swiss. There was another player, Tom Dolzel, who took it to top 8. And as we all know, Tom Dolzel every single year only plays in 2 tournaments. He plays in Nationals, qualifies for Worlds, and plays in Worlds. He did the same this year. He got 3rd place at Worlds with his Reshifflosion list, but he also got in the top 8 for Worlds with his Reshifflosion, and that led a lot of hype and a lot of people very interested in the deck. A lot of people moved over to it because our format does not have very many decks, and when there's an untested deck, most people want to try it out. They tried it out, and it did very well. It did the same for me. It was the first deck that I tried testing for Worlds, and I really liked it. Here's some of the pros of the deck. Now, all you really do is you use Reshiram and Typhlosion to consistently get energy out, hit for 120 or more with plus powers over and over again, and that's about the whole story. Now, this is a very simple deck. It's very straightforward, which is both good and bad. It means that you have a minimal chance of making misplays. It means that your strategy is very straightforward and you can get set up really well over and over again. The only downside is it also makes you predictable and easy to counter for people who dedicate a lot of time to beating you. Now, in addition to just being very fast, very consistent, very easy to use, the deck is also extremely inexpensive. Reshiram is a tin promo, Typhlosion Prime is a tin promo, and that's really all the big stuff that's in the deck. It's so much less money than something like Magnezone with Yanmega or any other deck featuring either of those two Pokemon, and it makes it really desirable. Now, I do recommend that you pick this up if you're just getting into competitive play because it's a straightforward deck, it's easy to use, it's cheap to buy, and it could help you get into competitive play a lot quicker with a lot stronger deck, and that's why it did so well this year's World Championships. Next up is Yanmega Magnezone. Now, I'm not sure about the fourth copy, but almost exclusively, all the Yanmega Magnezone decks ran Kingdra as well. Now, Kingdra Prime is a great tech. You leave it on your bench and you Spray Splash every turn to drop 1 damage counter. Now, this can help in all kinds of ways, but the big one is dropping a single damage counter on a benched Pokemon with 50 HP, and then sniping it with Yanmega Prime's linear attack for a knockout. Yanmega Magnezone's really strong because it's consistent and fast at the same time. Now, Magnezone gives you that slow attacker that does a lot of damage while also giving you the draw power of Magnetic Draw, and Yanmega is a turn 2 attacker that attacks for 0 energy. Combined, you kind of get a best of both worlds, and while it might be a little bit harder to play than something like Reshiram, if you dedicate enough time to the matchups, it can really help out. All in all, it's another great deck, very consistent, very fast, and it has a lot of options. Now, moving into our World Championship deck, Magnusson Emboar, you might be thinking, I feel like I've heard of this deck before. And that's because it was one of the big decks that everyone was hyping when Heart Gold Soul Silver first came out. Everyone was talking about Magnusson Emboar, how it's the best deck in the format. I even put it up at number 1 for my best Heart Gold Soul Silver on decks. Now, after Canada's Nationals, that all changed. There was a lot of hype in these faster decks with Yanmega and Magnezone, and all the hype just spilled off of Magnusson Emboar. Nobody really cared about it anymore, and it was kind of forgotten. It struggled a little bit against the faster decks. Most people didn't have the most consistent lists, or they had lists that relied on running a lot of Clefas, and once Tyro got popular, nobody really wanted to run a slower Magnusson Emboar deck anymore. However, David Cohen, our world champion this year, found that Magnusson Emboar has an extremely good matchup against Reshiram Typhlosion, and seeing as Reshiram was the most played deck, playing a deck that can beat the most played deck is another great strategy for World Championships. Now, the strategy for this deck is also very straightforward. Use Emboar to attach as many energy as you like during your turn, as long as they're fire, and you can either power up Magnezone for one-shots, or you can power up Rayquaza Deoxys Legend for one-shots, getting you prizes very quickly, and while it might take a little bit of time to set up, once you get rolling, it's pretty hard to stop. The deck did what it was supposed to do. It beat the metagame of Reshiram, and it won Worlds. And the last deck that I'd like to talk about is definitely a doozy. As I said, we're just calling it Ross's deck because it doesn't have an official name yet, and everyone will recognize that name as long as the deck is played. Now, here's the idea behind Ross's deck. Now, I know when I've talked about the deck in the past, I list all these Pokemon, and it just sounds like a mess, but I'm going to go through it step by step to explain how it works. Primarily, it's a trainer lock deck. It wants to get Vileplume out to stop your trainer item cards from being played, which is really restrictive. It stops cards like Rare Candy from getting your Stage 2 Pokemon out, Plus Powers for doing extra damage, Communications and Junk Arms for getting your resources back. It leads a lot of the decks that are in our format right now with bad hands, once Vileplume gets out. Now, the deck also runs Reuniclus for moving damage counters. Reuniclus is pretty risky, as I've said in my last episode of Card of the Day. It has a low amount of HP, its basic has a low amount of HP, it's another Stage 2, but once you get it out, it's invaluable to the rest of the deck strategy, which is running tank Pokemon that have strong weaknesses against the rest of the format that can basically win you the entire game once you get everything out. Those 3 tank Pokemon are Donphan, which holds a great weakness against Magnezone and Zekrom. It also has Suicune Entei Legend, which holds a weakness against all the fire decks, such as Reshiram, and it can one-shot their entire deck with 1 attack. And the third Pokemon is Zekrom, which holds a favorable weakness against both Yanmega and Kingdra. Now, using either of those 3 Pokemon to just take out your opponent's entire side of the field is pretty difficult, But once you figure out the deck and get it rolling, it works pretty well. The deck's aim is to use Pichu from Heart Gold Soul Silver and use Playground to set up all the basics on your side of the field right away. When he used it against me, he got out 2 Solosis and 2 Oddish. This way, if one of your Pokemon gets sniped, you can still evolve into the next one. Now, naturally being a slower deck, the deck runs 4 Twins, so that once you fall behind, you can get all those rare candies, Stage 2 Pokemon, whatever you need to set up, right away, get set up, and then start turning the game into a favorable for you. Now, the deck does have a few weaknesses. Obviously, being slower, you're going to have to take a risk in being able to catch up on time after you've admitted that you're going to fall behind in prizes and then try and catch up. So it takes a lot of practice to play the game very quickly. It also involves a lot of strategic moves. Twins is a very hard card to play. You can take 2 cards from your deck of your choice, and that can be very hard without a lot of practice. I played Twins in my Worlds list, and it took me a long time before I decided that I liked it enough. But once you've practiced with Twins, it's a really strong card. It just takes a lot of practice. And finally, to go along with that time problem, the deck does not have a very good sudden death game, as we saw in Sudden Death in Game 3 of Worlds. David Cohn was able to take 1 prize with 2 energy on a Magnezone Prime, and that was basically the game. Unless you get a Donphan out and a Fighting Energy right away, you don't really have a way to take turn 2 knockouts, and you are kind of at the mercy of this fast format. However, the deck is really unique. A lot of these cards in combination had never been seen before. It also ran Tropical Beach for draw power, which was the promo card that we only saw the night before we were actually able to play it. And altogether, it was a very cool deck, and it's definitely going to see a lot more play over the course of the next season. And that's about everything to know with the top decks that performed at Worlds. Now, they were all either very consistent decks, or decks that were very good against the rest of the field, and beat those consistent decks. And that's the kind of mindset to come in with Worlds. You either have to play a deck that you know can win, and you know can beat everything else, or you have to play a deck that can beat the decks that you know everyone's going to play. Now, let's move on to the second section, Emerging Powers. Now, unfortunately, I don't think Emerging Powers is the best set. It's not extremely strong. It has some really good cards in it, but most of it is filler. Most of it is Japanese promos being printed that we didn't own already, that kind of stuff, and that makes for not a great set, more along the lines of Call of Legends. I know that doesn't sound great, but there's still a lot of stuff to talk about, so let's talk about what is good. Well, for starters, we've got Beartick. This is a card that I've talked about in a card of the day already, and it's a card I'm still on the fence with. The idea is Beartick's attack can stop a Pokemon cold. I'm so funny. No, but the attack, when used, forces your opponent to either have to evolve or retreat out of its effect, otherwise you won't be able to attack the entire rest of the turn. Now, you can play Switch to get out of this, but most people running Beartick are going to be running it with Vileplume to stop Switch, leaving you to either have to retreat or have to evolve, or you're stuck to take 50 damage over and over again. Now, Beartick does have a lot of good stats. Water is a really great type to be. Metal is a really great weakness to have because nobody plays Metal. 130 HP is really high. The retreat cost is high, but you're probably just going to be attacking with Beartick straight up. Now, he is a little bit slower to set up. You might have to run something like Feraligatr or just bide on setting by just manually attaching over and over again, and that's some of the reasons that I don't like him. The other reason is one of the most popular Pokemon in our format already, Yanmega Prime, has 110 HP, meaning you'll have to attack it 3 times, and it has free retreat, so you can just keep cycling Yanmega and attack that way, and the deck should crumble pretty quickly to that. Now, a lot of people are trying to work on different ways to deal with this, such as hand disruption through Weavile, and that might work, it might not, but right now I think Beartick is a little bit of an overrated card. Next up is another Pokemon that's getting a lot of hype, Gotha Tell. Now, Gotha Tell I think is good, but it still requires a bit of work. I've talked about this here and there, but here's how it works. Gotha Tell is a Vileplume, and it trainer locks, but only when it's active. The plus side is that it doesn't trainer lock yourself. Now, that's huge in this format. That means that you can play all these trainers like Rare Candy, the up-and-coming Catcher, Junk Arm, and things like that, while your opponent can't play them at all. This is really strong, but the only problem is Gotha Tell is a really slow attacker. It requires 3, 4, or even 5 Psychic Energy before you start dealing any real kind of damage, and that means that you're going to have to spend some time going slow and setting up. Now, everybody's talking about Gotha Tell right now with that same raw setup. You run both Gotha Tell instead of Vileplume and Reuniclus to move damage counters and allow you to have a late game and afford to fall back in prizes first before you deny your opponent of taking anything of the sort. Now, I talked about that in my card of the day. I still think it's a solid strategy that's worth exploring, and I'm definitely going to be testing that deck soon. If I learn more about it, I'll try and make a video on it, but in the meantime, I say test that and trade for Gotha Tells, because it's one of the few good rare cards in the set. Now, as far as Pokemon, there's only 2 more that I think are strong, and they're more techie Pokemon that might not actually be that good. The first is Tornadus, who is one of our full art cards, so you can get it either in full art or in just regular rare form for a lot cheaper, and it's decent, and I think it works best in Zekrom. The idea is he hits 3 for 80, which isn't great, but he works with colorless energy, so he works with double colorless too. Then you move one of your energy from Tornadus to your bench. Now, normally, this would be a terrible attack, and despite his 110 HP for a basic, I'd say that he's pretty bad. Most things don't really have a colorless weakness other than Rayquaza Deoxys Legend, but if you think about him in the right context of the right deck, he could be really strong. I think he works with Zekrom. He works really well against Donphan because he has fighting resistance, meaning that Donphan can only 3-shot you, and you can 2-shot it by hitting for 80 damage, and also, moving in energy is pretty good. It lets you conserve resources by moving an energy back to your Zekroms in the bench while you set up, and I think it could work pretty well in the deck. Now, I haven't built the deck yet, but Tornadus with Zekrom seems really good, and I'm definitely going to work on it in the future. Lastly, a card that I kind of like is Sigilyph. Now, at 90 HP for a basic, it's pretty strong, and its 1 Psychic Energy attack Reflect makes damage do 40 damage less on your opponent's turn, meaning that they have to hit for 130 damage to knock you out. So if you start with Sigilyph and Reflect right away, there's no way you're going to be knocked out, and you'll have some time to buy it as you set up. Now for a Psychic and a double colorless, he snipes for 50 damage. That's kind of expensive for energy, but he works well with Yanmega. Snipe for 50 is still pretty strong, and if you're already running Psychic Energy, then you could Devolve with Jirachi too. Now I'm not saying Sigilyph is the best Pokemon in the set, but he's worth looking at, and I might try him in a fun deck sometime in the future. Aside from that, there aren't really that many strong Pokemon in the set, and I already have to move on to trainers. It's unfortunate, but as I said, it's a lot of filler. They're saving all the best stuff for our next set, but for now, we still have a few strong trainer cards coming into the format. First is Charon. Now, Charon is just draw 3 cards, and that actually makes it a pretty good card. It's better than the previously used Cheerleader's Cheer, which forces you to draw 3, and then lets your opponent draw 1 if they want. They always are going to want. And it's better than Bill, which is just draw 2 cards, which everyone mocked. Now, it's kind of strange that you just add 1 extra draw and all of a sudden it goes from a mocked card to a card that everyone is hyping, but this format just doesn't have very much straight draw. There's Sage's Training, which lets you look at 5, but then you have to discard 3 and only take 2, and there's also Engineer's Adjustments, but that forces you to have an energy in your hand and discard it first before drawing 4. Drawing 3 is actually kind of good in this format. It's a great consistency card. I think it'll work in about any deck, and while it might not be the best, I personally still prefer cards like Juniper, Professor Oak's New Theory. It's definitely worth looking at, and it could be solid. Next up is Crushing Hammer. Now, this card I'm very on the fence for. I think it could either be really good or just really mediocre. It's an energy removal too. You flip a coin. If heads, discard an energy on your opponent's side of the field. Now that seems really good. Again, coin flip isn't very great, but with cards like Junk Arm you can reuse it and abuse it, but right now our format isn't extremely energy dependent. Other than Magnezone or Pokemon like Reshiram, who already do have some sort of energy acceleration, you don't really have too many energy on the field. Donphan works on 1 energy, Yanmega works on 0 energy, Cinccino works on 1 energy, just Pokemon like that kind of restrict the power of Crushing Hammer. Also, when you take into consideration that we already have a non-coin flip card that removes energy, which is Lost Remover, it's kind of hard to tell if Crushing Hammer will actually be good or not. However, it'll be in the format for a while. It's definitely worth looking at when decks do become more energy dependent, and it'll definitely be good then. Next up is Max Potion. I already did a card of the day on Max Potion. You can click here to watch that, and I say everything then that I mean right now. Nothing has really changed since. It's going to be a very strong card in those low energy decks, and those low energy decks are already going to like Catcher, so it'll definitely be seen a lot. And lastly, we have Catcher. Once again, I've already done a card of the day on Catcher, and it is going to be as big as everyone's talking about. Catcher just naturally helps all those decks that already liked Pokemon Reversal. It's strong against Trainer Lock because you'll be able to get off those Catchers without relying on a flip before you are Trainer Locked. It's strong against decks that take slow time to set up because you can pull up their basics and knock them out as they're setting up. It's just really, really good. It's going to favor fast decks and definitely give them a lot to abuse. It's a card that's going to be in our format for a while. I personally really like it because it means no more relying on flips for reversals and complaining about bad or good flips, and it should be really cool. And that's everything for emerging powers. I know that was quick, I know that was a mouthful, but there's not really too much to talk about in the set, and everything from the Japanese Red collection that everyone's been speculating on for a while is finally going to be released in our new set, Noble Victories. Noble Victories should come with a lot of cool things, including Victini, the Musketeer Trio, and Chandelure, and all those cool Japanese cards that everybody's been speculating with and they thought was going to be in our currently released set. Should be the first set that we get in the format, should make things a lot more diverse, and it should be a set that'll be worth buying indefinitely. Unfortunately, we gotta wait for it to be released and deal with emerging powers, but in the meantime, I'll do my best to update you guys with what kind of decks are emerging from emerging powers, and we'll see how everything goes. The last bit of news, as I just mentioned before, is that our tournament structure is changing up a little bit, and that is that there will be 2 different dates for regionals. First, there's going to be regionals when they always were, around springtime, and there's also going to be regionals in November. Here's how the tournament structure is looking right now, thanks to Pokebeach, and it's definitely going to be interesting. Now, all we can do is speculate until we know exactly what's what, but what everybody is saying is that we're going to have 10 regionals that we've always had every year, but they're going to break them up into something like 5 and 5. Now, if they space those out well, this could be good. It means that people who live in the right areas will be able to attend 2 regionals instead of just 1, and that could help you boost your rating and things like that. Now, on the downside, if the rating system works the way that it has been, it does kind of give an unfair advantage to those people who are able to attend both regionals as opposed to just 1, because it gives them a lot better opportunity to get all the points that they need through wins. It will also give them better prize support than the other players, and that's led a lot of people to speculate that Pokemon is changing up the way that they do their rating system this year. Now, I have no confirmation on this whatsoever, just heard a lot of rumors, and it would be really good for the game. As you guys saw with me last year, the way the rating system works now is that it hurts players once they have high enough ratings, and it does encourage people to drop out of events. Some people drop in cities before they get into top cut so they don't risk getting a loss, or like me, I had to drop through nationals just to make sure that my rating would stay high enough for worlds. It ended up working well for me, but I would have liked to play through nationals, and I've heard a lot of rumors that Pokemon's trying out a new system this year. I have no idea what'll happen, but either way, our announcements for the next season will be September 1st, and I'll get you guys that information as soon as possible. That's about everything I've got. I know that it's a mouthful, I know that it is a lot to think about, but we're moving into a new season of Pokemon. It should be really exciting, and I'll do my best to get you guys the best content that I can, and all the coolest videos. In particular, I'm going to work on getting more match videos up, and I'll update you guys as those come out over time. Until then, thanks for watching Prof-It, and have a great weekend. Peace!
You want the best tricks? I suggest you Prof-It. You want a mess Brit? I suggest you drop it.
Once we started rolling, you know you can't stop it. Let's go and get some lessons from JWittz and Prof-It. Yeah!